then we got two different kinds. We got these little 23s, and then we have the 25Ts. The little guys, the 23s, don't have taps. They're set standard at 5 watts. 5 watts, in a 70 volt system, or in a 100 volt system too. That's rated at 10 watts. This guy, we'll look on the back, kind of the same deal as this. You've got this little rubber gasket that pops out, and you need a little tweaker screwdriver, and it's the same thing. You can run either 70 volt or 100 volt where your taps are, and then they've got a little circle and dot which you can also pass through, which is just a straight pass. That'll be 8 ohm, and it'll show you basically what to use.
So if you tap, if you use the 100 volt option on the amp, it seems like you get double the wattage out of this.
You do get double the wattage, yeah.
Same performance sound, but just
yeah.
Yep.
All right, put these guys away. All right, so let's look at quick how to wire these things. So, a 70 volt system, most of the time we wire these things up, we're using these volume controls. The volume control has the speaker and the amp. So if I was going to go basically to wire one speaker, I'm going to come out of the output, positive and negative, to the amp, positive and negative. Then I'm going to jump these same things, positive and negative, to the speaker of whatever colors I want to use. Make sense? So that's the volume control to the speaker. If I wanted to keep that one zone and add more speakers on that same zone to link to this same volume control, all I have to do is add another wire. We'll twist them together. We'll use some wire nuts, and I'm going to jump to the other speaker. And I can basically add as many speakers in that line, adding up to the voltage of the amp. So this amp, if this amp is 500 watts per side, so I've got 500 watts, and say these are tapped at 5 watts each on that side, what's the math?
100.
100, yes. So you could have 100 speakers if they were tapped at 500 watts on each side of the amp. So, say I wanted another zone. When I first started doing these, like 10 years ago, I started doing all residential AV, working in houses, and 70 volt was new. So the first 70 volt system I got asked to do was at Calvary Chapel in Old Bridge, like that big church. And I wired it wrong. So what I ended up doing, my boss just gave me equipment and told me to go do it. So what I ended up doing was taking the feeds out to the volume control, to the speaker, like normal, worked fine. And then I jumped off the speaker outputs to another volume control, and then, more speakers, another volume control, and more speakers. The problem with doing it that way is that first volume control in the chain is going to affect everything downstream. So if this thing is turned down to 1, my next volume control in the chain can only go as loud as what this first one is set to. That obviously isn't the right way. So if we were going to have, out of the same output, if we were going to have, say, 3 rooms that are tied to that, what we're going to do is we're going to take the feed, we're going to go to the amp side of the volume control, and then we're going to jump from that amp side to every single input of the volume control that we're going to use. So if I have 3 volume controls, I'm going to come off of here. Typically, depending on if we're doing home runs or going where, but they're always going to get linked to the amp side. We're never going to jump off a speaker output to another input of a volume control, because like I said, the first one is always going to dictate how much the second or third or fourth zone is going to be.
And that's a transformer on the back of that volume control too, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's a transformer and an attenuator. Yeah.
Okay.
How many times can you jump out of the one volume control to other volume controls?
So that doesn't matter. It all matters what the voltage of the amp is. So you always just need to do the math to make sure that you're not, you don't want to be having 700 watts, of gear you know, in a 500 watt amp. You also have to realize what your attenuator is. So this one is a 35 watt. The two that we normally use are 35 watt and 100 watt. So if I have a 35 watt and I've got speakers tapped at 5 watts, obviously I can only link 7 speakers in that zone to this one volume control. Otherwise, I need to upgrade to 100 watt, or I have to boost this down to something lower. Make sense? All right, so same thing. If we were going to wire out of this amp and wire into an 8 ohm speaker, say we were using one of these guys just on the dot to set to 8 ohm, this would be a normal 8 ohm volume control. So you've got your amplifier, so you take your, you know, channels A and B, left and right, wire it into here, and then you've got an output left and right that you would wire to say 2 of these speakers. And that's it. There's no daisy chaining involved. That's it. So most of these are only geared for one pair of speakers. These normal 8 ohm volume controls. They do make some. You know, I've purchased them a few times at like IEI or places that actually on the back of these have a switch that actually has an impedance matcher. Oh, look at that right there. This guy has it. So you have these little gold selectors, and you have these black plastic pins. So you can take the pins off and move them, and right here it'll say 2x or 4x. So you can run either 2 sets of speakers or 4 sets of speakers off this because it has an impedance matcher on it. So most don't have the impedance matcher, so you can really only do like 1 pair of speakers off of it. If they do, then you could. Now, we don't, if we're putting multiple pairs of speakers, typically we're running a 70 volt system. And these guys aren't rated for high voltage. I mean, I can't put this, you know, and put a couple pairs of, you know, these big kind of monster speakers, because they're not rated for that many watts. Make sense? All right. All right, so these crown amps that we use, there's 4 different models. There's the 1502, the 1002, the 2002, and the 2502. So basically, this is kind of what the specs are. I don't know who that is, but this is what
Amazon.
Okay, this is what the specs are for how much wattage you're going to get. So what is this? This is the 1000. So basically, when it comes to an 8 ohm system, your 8 ohms is going to be your standard. And then most amps will specify if they go down to 4 ohms or 2 ohms. So sometimes what it'll say is on the back of the amp, it'll say 350 watts continuous. So the continuous is what you want to go by. You don't want to go anything lower. So if it says continuous at 4 ohms, then you want to stick to 4 ohms. You don't want to drop down to 2 ohms. So kind of the way you figure this out is with impedance. If you're running in parallel, which we would be doing, it's going to drop every time you double up the speaker. So if both these outputs are 8 ohm outputs and I've got 1 speaker connected to it, we're going to be spitting out 8 ohms out of the amp. If I link 2 speakers on this guy, it's going to drop down to 4. If I add a 3rd speaker, it's going to cut in half again. It's going to drop down to 2. So this says that it's rated, you know, at 550 watts at 2 ohms. But you don't want to go anything lower than that. You always want to follow what it says. This guy doesn't say anything about continuous, so you'd be all right running at 2, but typically most amps don't go down to 2. Most amps only go down to 4. So the general rule of thumb is you only want to link two pairs of speakers to a channel. So we can run in series. We don't do that here. That's another way to wire. And the biggest reason we don't do that is if one speaker goes out in that chain, all of them go out. So if one in the series loop goes out, you're kind of done for. So yeah, so it doesn't really make sense for us to kind of pursue that avenue.